Hi, I'm Tonya Gratz with the Greene County Land and Water Conservation Department. Today I'm here with Nick Faessler. Nick, can you tell me about your farm?
Well, I've got on 80 acres here, and I farm another 35 acres beyond this, and then I also do the planting that Pat and I have, so I'm covering probably, I think this year it's going to be 250 acres with this machine.
Okay. So tell us about this planter behind us. How
Well,
old is it?
Well, it's about, I knew you were going to stump me on that one. It's probably getting upwards of 30 years old, maybe a little less than that.
Okay.
It's a John Deere 1750. They call it a conservation planter. I think that all it means is it had no-till coulters on it, which are no longer there.
Sure. So when somebody goes to plant or no-till, what do you think are the two most important things that they do to their planter to make it work in a no-till system?
Well, you've got to get it in the ground. You've got to get the seed in the ground, and you've got to be able to cover the seed properly and get that furrow closed. So those are probably the two most important things you're doing with that machine.
Okay. And so when farmers are planting in this new system, if they've done tillage in the past and then they plant, they know how to check that to make sure it's how they want it. When you go to a no-till system, what things should they be checking for?
Well, you've got to get the seed in the ground. You've got to get the proper depth. So you really got to keep an eye on your depth. So if your row units will not go in the ground, you've got to put more weight on the row unit, and that's either done with springs or air pressure or hydraulic pressure on some of the modern planters today.
What do you like for your depth on corn?
You got to be 2 inches. You can go anywhere from 1.5 inches to 2.5 easily. You want to make sure you get it into good solid moisture if you're on the dry side. Generally in Wisconsin, we're usually wet enough that that's not much of an issue, but you got to get it in the moisture. You got to get the seed tucked in there, and you got to get that furrow closed up. That's pretty important too.
Sure, sure. So what do you think is the easiest situation to start no-tilling into?
No-till into last year's bean grounds. That's probably the easiest. The ground is nice and mellow, and it's a pretty good place for most people to start.
Sure. Do you have experience planting into cover crops, whether they're living or dead?
Yeah, I've planted into a lot of different rye crops, anywhere from knee-high. One year I planted into rye that was all headed out, about as tall as a tractor tire. I've planted into alfalfa that was over knee-high. I've planted into sod fields that were much less than that. But it has a little bit of a challenge somehow.
Do you prefer whether the cover crop is alive or if it's been killed out and dead?
Well, it kind of depends what cover crop you're talking about. I've planted into rye, 12, 14, 18 inches tall, and it goes just fine. Killed it off with herbicide afterwards. I'm not sure if I'd say there's a preference or not, but planting green works good. There's nothing wrong with it. A lot of people plant a lot of acres going into green cover.
Sure. Why do you no-till?
Well, to save the soil, for one thing, less runoff. You're using a lot less fuel to get the crops in the ground. There's just tons of advantage. No-till allows better percolation in the soil for any heavy rains that come. I suppose as farther west you go into the drier parts of the country, you're actually saving moisture that you need to grow that crop. Generally, it's not a big deal here. Of course, last year it was. So, you have a different challenge every year, no matter what you're doing out here.
Sure. If you could add a new piece or a new part to your planter, what would you add?
Besides chrome wheels, maybe I'd go with a controlled downforce system. That might be all right. Right now, this planter has a spring downforce system where you get 4 settings. Okay. And for no-till, I have the strongest setting.
Okay. And why do you have this planter?
Well, before I had a 7000, and it wasn't quite as solid a planter as this. It didn't have a near as heavy downforce spring. This planter also has vacuum seed delivery instead of the old finger pickup. So I think that's a little less problem when you get into the planting side of it. Okay, so when I first got this planter, it had no pop-up fertilizer on it. So I put the tanks, the pump, and the whole delivery system on that, so I had starter fertilizer. The next thing I did was I got into a situation where the no-till coulters were hairpinning corn stalks into the ground, and I couldn't have that, had to take the coulters off. So I've gone without no-till coulters since then. The next thing I made was the row cleaners were pretty old, pretty sloppy, and I replaced them with a new set of row cleaners. And instead of the ones that are real long that you can put the no-till coulter in behind them, these are the shorter ones. They're pin type adjustment. They're not the hydraulic or air type adjustments that they use on some modern planters. And then the other thing I did is back here I put in a crimping furrow closer. It originally came with rubber wheels on both sides. These are from a Great Plains drill. They seem to work pretty good. Like I say, there's dozens of them on the market. You can try all kinds of different things. Some work better for some situations than others. These seem to work pretty good. You just got to have them adjusted properly.